You can be fantastic at building the technology, but if nobody else knows how to use it, you're just building it for yourself.
We're moving into a world where we don't need to actually be great at human connections because we have an AI connection at all times.
It's a piece of art. Ideas are less important than people.
Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence Podcast. It is with great pleasure I have Vladimir Baranov with me today. Vladimir is a rare hybrid, a deeply technical three-time founder and former senior operator turned executive coach, focused on the human systems behind scaling companies, which is probably more and more important in the era of AI. After years as a founder and CTO operator across industries like fintech, enterprise software, and aerospace, Vladimir now works with technical founders and leadership teams who hit an invisible ceiling, not because of tech, but because of people, decision-making, and internal friction. Through human interfaces, his company, he helps leaders diagnose misalignment, cognitive bias, and leadership bottlenecks before they become existential business problems. Today's conversation is not about hacks. It's about the internal mechanics of entrepreneurial excellence. Vladimir, welcome to the pod.
Thank you, Adam, for having me. Wow, what a background. Does that mean you sure?
In the year, tell us more. So, if you founded 3 different companies, give us a high level of those companies, and give people a reason to think, why should I listen to what Vladimir has to say?
Yeah. Well, I don't think anybody has to listen. It's a free country, but a couple of companies. So the first one was in peer-to-peer lending. It's when those peer-to-peer loans were rising, we thought like, why not us? We should do it. And it only took us 6 months to figure out that we needed a really big book of loans in order to operate. And so we had to shut it down because that was not visible, but it was excellent.
I mean, 6 months is pretty quick to figure out that you don't have something like that's actually impressive.
Yeah. Well, we got to the point where like, oh, we need to have $100 million so we can have our own book of loans in order to prove this whole peer-to-peer lending thing. And it's like, oh, yeah, we don't have access to that money now. And so that led me to another business, which is also fintech in wealth management SaaS. We started out with a robo-advisory, which sort of started gaining traction, but it did not. But we built out a financial system for wealth advisors to manage their clients. And we sold it eventually after 7 years to Franklin Templeton. And then I had a space tech itch to scratch and it transferred industries. And I was a co-founding advisor for a firm and eventually rolled into the executive role, which was building satellites and instruments for satellites, which were observing other satellites. So it's a very much business to gov tech. Out of all the businesses, like I observed all the different things that are happening between engineers and business engineers and then entrepreneurial mindset. And I thought that the biggest kind of impact I can make is transferring out and becoming a founder coach. So that's what I'm focusing on right now.
And so that's your business right now.
Yes.
I want to ask you like why that was the case versus building your own company, coaching, all this stuff. But before we get too deep, I ask everyone the same question when we start. How do you define entrepreneurial excellence?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think in the excellence in the end is not the output, it's more the actions and activities and emotion that you engage in. It's the active mindset that you apply to the data that you get from the world. So I don't think it's a state of being, it's a state of action and being in motion and taking data as what it is and making regressions and making convergences to the outcomes that you want to produce. So I'd say that's what defines for me entrepreneurial excellence.
So I mean, I like that at a high level, but I know my audience tends to think in sort of specific metrics to some extent. Are there any metrics you would say, like, I imagine many people, especially people listening to this podcast, would think that they are people who have that mindset that you just described.
Yep.
But it doesn't always mean you're going to have any level of success, quote unquote success, or excellence, right? So what does the outcome look like to know that you're on the path of excellence?
Right. So I think one is you need to define for yourself, what does success mean to you? Is it living a good life there where you wake up, you have food on your plate, you have a beautiful family, you live in a place where you want to have? Is it perhaps defined monetarily, like you're trying to get to as much money as possible? Perhaps it's health, like, right? Not everybody is blessed with beautiful health, and maybe that is your goal. So number one step is defining those outcomes. And if day to day you're making motions to progress towards those outcomes, then you are living that entrepreneurial mindset and you're moving closer to that goal. Now, Sometimes goal does not need to be finite. It could be a balance, right? So let's say if you're getting to a specific level of health, a specific level of well-being with a family, you don't necessarily need to have more and more and more. How do I get closer to my family members and so on? There's a healthy balance that you need to maintain. But in the beginning, it's very important to define what are those important things for you personally and not necessarily for others.
What do you define as being important to you? How do you define excellence in your mind?
Ooh. That
Always important to ask the coach what they want, how they lead their own life.
Yeah, that's really good. Okay, so like through mental gymnastics, I concluded that our whole life is about basically an eternal war of space rocks versus life. So in a really, really, really long timeline, space rocks or life will survive. I'm on Team Life, and I want to help Team Life be there when that battle will continue to happen. And like to make it last.
And that'll be just because we're a little blue dot in the middle of space and it's filled with lots of things that not intentionally, but might want to actually kill us, like space rocks, or we just have to be innovative to stick around.
Exactly. And that's, I think, the mission overall. That's starting at the very, very top. If you have to pick one, I think that's the one which kind of logically makes sense. I mean, there are other ways to reaching that conclusion or a different conclusion, but to me, this one makes sense. And that's where like my thought pattern descends from. And if I'm on Team Life, so what are two things that I can do? I can proliferate life or I can sustain life. And what are the things that I can do to do that? One, I can build a business. I can work for somewhere for a business that does one of those, or I can help other leaders build those businesses in the way that I have had experience, I had privilege of experience having, so then I can share that experience and also ask them really good coaching questions that makes them much better at that. Founders as a category are the people who move the technological progress forward. So that's the proliferation part of life. And what I notice is that for a lot of founders, especially in the beginning, when they transfer from their full-time roles or they transfer from, let's say, their young age into something that is more specific business-wise, they are very technically savvy, they're very tactically savvy, but they're not have the benefit of experience of how to deal with other people, especially if they come from the technical side. Through our education or through our own mindsets, we learn really good how to operate with the technical founders, with the machines or interfaces, screens, but when it comes to interaction with people, we just don't get enough practice, and curriculum all the way through the PhD does not, in colleges or universities or high school, does not teach us how to interact with humans. I'm not saying...
Yeah, and we're probably getting worse at that too, right? During COVID, post-COVID, plus every younger people are growing up with devices from day one almost.
Exactly. So like that practice is absolutely absent, and it's also very high risk. It's very risky activity because there is such a failure mechanism, emotional failure mechanism. If you fail in front of the other person, if you say a wrong thing or you hear or mishear a wrong thing, we don't know how to do that dynamic very well. And again, very specifically for technical people. And so going back to like the whole structure thing, if founders and technology founders and innovators are the ones who are pushing the technological progress forward, if I can help them not fail their businesses because of their human interaction, I could be a small multiplier at the speed at which this technological progress is moving forward. So that's kind of like I tied it together for myself.
Yeah, no, so to reiterate, to maybe summarize that, basically being a coach and helping these other companies and founders make great businesses and have a human connection, that leads to better outcomes for them, and therefore that fills your cup and making a small dent in the universe, essentially.
That is correct.
Why does it matter for a founder of any sort, technical or otherwise, to be good at having a human connection? And so what I mean specifically is, I could argue, and I'm going to here, you can obviously push back, that we're moving into a world where we don't need to actually be great at human connections because we have an AI connection at all times, right? I can have an AI girlfriend or boyfriend or coach, you name it. Why do I need to be any good at having a human connection when companies are getting smaller and smaller because more things either being done by AI or being delegated and outsourced?
No.
Why does a human connection matter?
No, for sure. That's a great question. I think number one reason at a lot of decision points, we still have a human mind deciding what goes forward, what doesn't go forward.
What do you mean by human mind? It's just like the human mind's decide. Like it's like the CEO who happens to still be a person is making a decision? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. For example, you're trying to partner with somebody as a company, right? You're trying to enable a marketing channel. You're trying to get on the stage to promote your company. You're trying to hire a very important developer. You're trying to hire a lawyer. You're trying to negotiate a deal for your company. On the other side, you are more likely for the next couple decades, probably, I don't know for how long, but still, like, there's still a long timeline where you're still going to be interacting with a human who's going to be making decisions which will benefit or detrimentally affect your business progress. Also, innovation wise, if you're building a commodity business, for example, if you're selling gold and you just found a different side of gold, all the channels are enabled. As long as you know how to produce gold in isolation, maybe you don't really need a lot of human interactions. But any sort of innovation requires us fitting our models of the world with those who are going to be consuming it. And that requires very thorough therapeutic psychological understanding of how other people's minds work, so you can extract that information which is important for you to build a better product.
Okay. So that's why the human connection is still important. So then, walk me through like the idea of like becoming better at this human conversation, right? So, many founders evolve from being a builder to a leader, but they never make the transition fully, right? To truly being a leader.
Yes.
Like, what is this shift required for that evolution to become a leader, not just a builder, and have that ability to lead, which is a human, leadership is a human skill set. I don't think AIs will ever need to have a leadership skill set because the hive mind is always connected. You don't need a leader. I don't know. You go on and on, but like, how do you make that transition?
Yeah. So transition implies that we're going from one state to another. And I would say there's multiple states in between. And the final state also is not defined absolutely. It's very personal. And I'll give an analogy to easier understand that. I believe any kind of development of our soft skills is more like surfing. And then what we're really perfecting is our ability to stay on a surfboard. And we really cannot control the waves which will be coming at us. And once we have that analogy, how can we practice that surfing with the least amount of damage to ourselves, our reputation, our businesses, so we get much better at surfing? But we also ourselves have to define what are those outcomes which are important for us. Is it how long do you stay on the trend or on the wave? Or can you do special tricks? What is important for you is to achieve as a leader, as you're surfing that ocean of people's opinions or people's interactions? What in the end do you want to accomplish? Do you become a great actor? Do you want to become a great speaker? Do you want to embed vision in the people? Do you want people just gasp anytime you talk because of the facts that you're sharing? And it's a personal decision. But let's say any of those, becomes an outcome. Practice makes perfect. How can you find places where you can start practicing interactions with other people, driving them to a certain outcome? What are those safe places? Immediate thing which comes to mind, practical perspective, is Toastmasters. And you may be familiar with this club, which for anybody who wants to become a much better public speaker is open to the world, and you can join that club, and other people there also want to become better public speakers. You come there, and there are other people who are willing to interact with you. That'll be one of the example of practice that if you do enough of, you become much better at that skill, and you start listening to your audience. You start presenting topics which are relevant to your audience, and you're also able to deliver those topics in the most coherent and consistent way that lands with your audience. So this is one of the reasons I named my company Human Interfaces, which is if your background is engineering, much more understandable that between the humans there is an interface, and we use API calls in parentheses. We use variables, we define them, we load up the overheads, we plug in the profile of the person we're looking at, and then we communicate with that overhead in mind so that the information that we're sending to the other side lands well. But we also are listening to their feedback, so we can use that feedback to build our own model of their universe so we can know what next thing to ask or to tell them.
Thinking through like, okay, go to Toastmasters, get better at public speaking. How does a founder still choose that, right? So I find as a founder, right, I'm a multi-time founder, investor, all the other things. I don't have a lot of time in my day. Like if I'm lucky, I'm going to have enough time to write back to a bunch of messages I have on Slack and get back to a few emails and then do a bunch of other calls with customers. Maybe then I have an hour or two at night where I can do a few extra things. How how do I decide that I should prioritize, or how should I decide, how do I decide prioritization of getting better at the human interaction piece? Like, why is that, or why should that be a priority for a founder compared to the multitude of other options for me to work on every day?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You did mention this example, and I'm going to pull on that talking to the customers. Having your soft skills improved, and there are a plethora of different ones you can choose from, can make those interactions better. If your goal is to make a sale, if it's to make a better effort at informing them of what you're trying to do, is it to do a discovery conversation with them so you can understand what next features to build or what next thing to pivot towards? Soft skills and improving soft skills can benefit that. And let's say if you don't have time to practice, then, like you practice in production. So you practice on every new client call that you get. You just try to set your own goals. I'm trying to make this person a little bit more happy. I'm going to ask only open-ended questions. I'm going to listen and I'm going to summarize back to the person what I said so they actually hear that I understood them in a way that they wanted to be understood.
Yep. Okay. So then what? So is that the heuristic or measurement that what is the goal? I mean, I know I'm pushing here a little bit, but once again, there's so many other things for me to get good at. It's I want to make sure my product is amazing. I want to make sure all these other pieces, and these soft skills, I think, are really difficult for a lot of people to decide that they will focus on them. I'm more biased, right? Obviously, I think they're really important. Through my podcast, I become much better, I think, at asking questions and listening, active listening. I'm also, because it's important for my company, I do a lot of sales. I mean, I did 10 sales calls yesterday. I have 10 sales calls actually today. And I have an AI coach that sits in all my sales calls to listen in and give me feedback post-call on what I could be doing better. But I've been at this for a really long time. Yeah. I definitely don't think my younger self would have said, oh, I need to be good at the soft skills, right? I need to be better at building or technology, whatever. So one thing, why should someone really prioritize this? How do they decide, and how do they get the metrics to make them feel like they're doing a good job? So in the technical world, I build a new feature, I know right away, are people using it?
Yeah.
Getting good at sales might take me months, and it's hard to know if I'm really making progress.
So I think technical skill is done in isolation is an art piece. And this is why I tell a lot of founders, if they build their product and they have no market already established, if they haven't had any conversations with the people who are going to be using it, there's a really big chance that it will land flat and they will have no usage, but it will going to be very beautiful, complex, technological art piece. And if we are embarking on the journey of building beautiful technology without other people's input, it only is representation of your internal world and how you want others to use it versus how others want to use this piece of technology. You can be fantastic at building the technology, but if nobody else knows how to use it, or nobody else knows how to approach or how to use that UX or UI, you're just building it for yourself. Connecting to the needs and the wants and the desires and the opinions and the voices of the people who are going to be using it is hyper important of technological build. It's because it's a dance. It's an iterative dance between people's opinions, people's desires, people's hidden needs, which maybe they're not voicing, and what you're building. Because technology on its own does not exist without, well, it does. It's a piece of art. But if it's connected to the needs of the people that it's servicing, then it becomes a business.
So could I maybe summarize that a little bit? One thing I see a lot of founders do, especially technical founders, but is they want to sell lots of features, but they don't sell a feeling, right? So they might say, well, our product is 10x faster and gets you 10x better results, et cetera, but they don't say why I should care about any of those things. And therefore, I don't end up buying.
Yeah.
And is that sort of what you're saying essentially, is that as a founder, you need to get better at explaining the underlying emotional reason to purchase, and listening, hearing, seeing the emotional reason, and then turning that into a sale, whether it's a customer sale, a potential employee sale, you bring a new employee on board, things like that.
Yeah. So to a degree, so I believe any successful business needs to solve an underlying need of the market that it's being sold. But that need sometimes is expressed in ways that we don't recognize. And if we are trying to just address the needs of speed or address of color, it's faster, it's smaller, we're taking a guess at what the market wants. And people wanted a faster horse for a long time, but they didn't realize they really needed the car. So the underlying need was getting somewhere faster. It doesn't matter what method of transportation, but they didn't have the language yet or the words to express that they wanted an iron horse.
Mm-hmm.
But it is your responsibility as a founder, looking at your technology, understand what language your market speaks and express those questions that way. So when they reply, they understand, oh, I see, I can satisfy that need. I just need to educate them on a different approach. But listening to them and identifying those underlying needs is important, and without soft skills it's much harder to do that. Otherwise, by building features, you almost like spearfishing fish in the middle of the ocean, but you don't really know where the fish is at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally true. Was there a moment, like a conversation, a failure, leadership conflict, you name it, that led you to realize that solving for the kind of the human interface is not a tech issue, but a human one? Like, what was the catalyst for this change? Being a technical founder 3 times over, what was the catalyst for you?
Yeah, that's a good one. I remember being a software developer at Deutsche Bank, and it's a large organization. It's not an entrepreneurship forward organization. And when I've been building a lot of what I thought was excellent technology, and it was not being used. Like, I was executing on my tickets, I was doing my good job, I was getting paid, but the technology itself was not being used by users. And it was very frustrating to me as a builder and a creator, like saying like, what's going on? Why is all these things I'm building are not being used? And that sort of like started my thinking process. Like, well, there might be something behind there. Why are the people who are giving me assignments making those decisions? And eventually led to the place where I realized that people who were in charge, they were making decisions, they placing bets that they were hoping that some of the software I was building will gain traction with the people who are using it. And it didn't. But it wasn't my fault, but it was very frustrating because I thought it was successful, but it wasn't. And so that kind of started the whole avalanche.
It's just true for lots of engineers, right?
Yes.
Is they're building someone else's product and it fails not because technically it was wrong or bad, but because the product developer or designer had the wrong idea.
Exactly. And that's when your world starts falling apart, preconceived world, before you enter, after graduating from school, where you're practicing on your own individual projects. You're like, all right, I'll do a great job and everybody will love me. Yes, but not the users, because you're not interfacing with the users. You're not the one who's deciding what users want. It's the other people who do.
Okay. So that was just that realization. And so then what? I mean, wouldn't you just say, okay, engineers, go become a product manager if you want to understand the actual, what the outcomes are? But why was it like the human, what was it the catalyst for like, this is a human interface problem?
Yeah. Well, so let's go up the hierarchy, and not in no way dismissing engineers. So we have the product person. And what does a product person do? Where do they get their indication of what they should be building? Yes, some product people just analyze the markets through the digits, so the data that they're getting from the market. And others, which are much better, they talk to the users directly. And I realized that as a developer, I almost had no interface whatsoever to the users to hear exactly what they wanted or not. Now, there's also this preconceived notions that engineers are smarter than other types of people out there. And I felt the same way too. I'm not saying I am. I'm just saying that's how I felt when I was going through school and was solving difficult problems.
The best ones have a very high opinion of themselves, sometimes misplaced, but they tend to be very smart.
So when you come from that model of the world, then you start thinking that the model of the world that you have is the correct in absolute ways. So anything that users are telling you, it's just a slight adjustment to perhaps the model that you have, and they have to understand the model of the universe which you have, which is a complete perverse relationship that you need to have. Because as an engineer, as an entrepreneur, and you could be an engineer, as an entrepreneur, you need to understand their model of operation and how they will be able to use your software given what they know about the universe, because they're the ones who are signing the checks and paying the bills, and they don't care about the truths that you have.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You said a bunch that like founders are often rationalizing rather than reasoning, right? What are the common rationalizations you hear from a lot of smart founders?
They compare sometimes themselves to the outputs of somebody else's effort without seeing the process of that effort. So if, let's say, we're seeing something on like that picture of the iceberg, where we see the top of the iceberg, which is the white mountain, and we don't see everything, the underlying effort that actually got us somewhere. So I was working with one entrepreneur in the middle 2000s, and I was the technical person, and they would say like, why can't you make it like the iPhone? Why can't you make it like the Apple would do it? I'm like, well, Apple spent decades perfecting their philosophy. before they build out 100,000 people team to understand what the convergence of the market and UX and UI is here. And what you're seeing here, as compared to, let's say, Google search, is just a Google bar, but you're not seeing billions of efforts of hours that people have spent in the background giving you that simple output. Simplicity sometimes confuses the people who study it by thinking that they can replicate it without putting the effort, and that effort sometimes is hidden. So that's where sometimes we think rationally, sometimes we look around and we're seeing what we think is information, but we're really seeing just data, which is outputted from other people's companies, and we're trying to build ours based on that result, without going to the underlying need, exactly what we're trying to solve.
And so, like, that makes sense that people are sort of just looking around and seeing the high level without actually going any deeper. Why do people end up doing that? In other words, like, what is the human psychological element to that? And how do you avoid that trap? Not just as a founder, but as a human. I mean, I this happened with various friends. They make certain assumptions right off the bat. They don't ask a lot of questions. And next, you're frustrated because they don't actually understand the underlying detail of the challenges involved, but they're making some base level rationalization.
Yes. I think it comes down to our natural ignorance / confidence. We as humans are somehow programmed to make convergences on theories or hypotheses given limited amount of information.
And humans and things are really good at that, but sometimes it can break down very quickly.
Oh, absolutely. But the thing is, if we don't do this, we don't move forward at all. Like, we end up ruminating until we get perfect answer, which never is available. What's important is just knowing that we have this fault, and by transfer learning from our previous experiences, realize how many hours do I need to be exposed to specific industry, specific source of information, specific clients, to kind of start thinking that has been enough. And the answer is, like, we don't know perfectly when, but it's definitely more than 1 minute.
Mm-hmm. So like, then how do you get better as that individual to not make those rationalizations, right? And be better at reasoning? Is it asking more questions and forcing yourself to ask more questions? Like, what is the secret to getting better there?
Yes. So number one is accepting that we have that fault, that we believe that we know a lot of things and we feel like we can move forward confidently, even though we don't have that information. So we need to be aware of that switch. Number two is the type of the conversation that we're having with the people or the source of information. It could be AI source of information that allows us to remove our own bias in the way that information is being presented. One of the typical traits of scientists and engineers is asking close-ended questions where we are confirming our own hypothesis about somebody else's model of the universe, versus asking open-ended questions with starting like, why do you think that way? What is the underlying structure behind your type of thinking? What experience led you to believe X, Y, and Z? Which then enables, quote unquote, a data dump from another people's mind without your own bias. Because our own bias could be shown in a question like, do you believe that that particular variable affects this variable in a particular way? And we'll get yes or no. But yes or no is only a one bit of information. It doesn't give you why. It doesn't tell you why the person replied that way. We also don't get the emotional perspective of why they have replied. Are they annoyed with us? So this is like the meta analysis now. Are they annoyed with us? Do they want to just get out of the conversation? Or do they want to finish answering these questions? We just have a very bad fuzzy data coming out when somebody answers just yes or no question. So when we're going out and we're trying to learn more, and asking those open-ended questions is very important and essential for getting the underlying truth.
But I found that a lot of people don't want to actually know the truth. They want their biases confirmed, or they don't do a good job, even with having like a PhD in my pocket with AI now. I find people are lazy and don't actually ask those questions in many instances. What is that? Is it because of the thesis? I mean, one of the theses that I have, and I think this is correct actually, just data wise. Most people want to be the center of their own story, and therefore asking questions of other people and learning about them and having you in a conversation. It's not actually a conversation. It's just a way for me to go talk about myself.
Yeah.
Most of the time. Yeah. I try not to let that happen with the podcast, but like, how does this come out with founders? Like, how should founders be much better at this in not being the center of their story. Because as a CEO founder, you almost by definition are the center of the story.
Yeah. The kind of questions I ask around there is the founders need to understand their relationship to humanity and other people. I personally believe I do not exist if other humans do not exist. So them existing and them thinking about the problems that they need to solve is part of my own existence. One way to test that is by asking a couple questions. Let's say one, if you're the last person on Earth, what would you do in the next 24 days, 24 hours, couple months? And when you start thinking about it, well, I would do something like immediately we'll rush to like, well, it's going to be have to do something with other people. Like, no, they're gone. You're the last one. What are you going to be doing? Versus you are the first person on planet Earth and you know there's going to be a spaceship arriving with, let's say, 5 million of people. What are you going to be doing? Again, speaking for my own way of answering these questions, you're probably going to be doing something not for yourself, but for others. You're going to be scouting, you're going to be researching where the food, where the rivers are, where all the other things, maybe build a couple of homes for them, whatever you can for them. So in a sense, it removes the center of gravity from your own self to where it is somewhere deeper in the other humanity than your own. Another example, which I bring up, it's similar, but you take a person to a moon or another foreign planet, and you say like, hey, you're existing on a planet, but you have a connection to planet Earth, or somebody cuts it off, and they will see you only after you're dead, like 70 years from now. What will you do with your time? You like my mind and then ended up converging that I will be only doing it for them. Like, even though like I know I will be doing a lot of things for my family too, but it's going to be for humanity overall. Like my mindset is like 99% of other people's needs. Like I will be doing it for them. No, fame and recognition is important, but in those circumstances, it kind of goes away. When you're first person or last person, they become less important. It's just like what starts driving you to it.
So do you try to tell yourself then on a regular basis, like, what if I was the last person on Earth? And that changes the questions you ask and how you interact with others. Does that boil it down to the point?
It does, because it creates a piece of your identity, which you realize is that your own. Oh, and this is kind of goes to like my mind philosophy a little bit. Is that the only thing that I was able to conclude that the consciousness is the meta pattern of all of my experiences. And that doesn't equal identity. It's just a regression. So then the identity itself does not exist. And like, how can I attribute it so much to that identity that identity created it? But no, it's the brain that regressed over all the experiences that they had and arrived with some algorithms, and other brains have done the same. And my purpose is to collaborate with others so we can do something greater for all of us. Now, yes, there is a personal stamp and it's important. And that's how we think tribally and so on, that all the branding also important. But at the high level, the personality identity really disappears. It's more like this perspective of individual experience, which I think the individual also disappears. It becomes in a relationship to the rest of the humanity.
So speaking about cognitive biases a little bit more, I mean, like, how do, or if at all, cognitive biases change at different stages for a company? So as a company is growing from really early stage, you and just your co-founder, to 10 people to 20 to 50, 100, or different revenue metrics, how do your biases change as a founder? Like, it's sort of early stage versus scale.
Yes. So I think there are two questions there. Like, how are you being aware of your biases? And how does the bias change in practice? So the first question, I think, is being aware of what states you're in, that even that the states exist. For a lot of first-time founders, it's an unknown thing, right? We're just going to grow big and go to IPO. It's recognizing that there's going to be a state change that you might not have been anticipated. And how can you learn about that is by looking at others who have gone through something similar and see if you can bring a map back from multiple other people who went through that journey. Also, it's asking the questions like, do we know what we're doing? Do we know where we're going? Do we know what our hypotheses are? Do we know who we are? Do we know what the roles we're playing? What roles we're playing in relationship to others? And what do we know about those roles being played well or good? How do we define that success internally between each other? I know a lot of these kind of conversations are not naturally happening, especially in engineering organizations, because again, there's no fundamental anything that is being brought from schools or other, let's say, large companies, which enables those people to succeed from scaling healthy and emotionally coherently.
So who does this well? Like, are there examples of companies or founders who've done this really, really well as they've grown and scaled, where they move from being engineering heavy to being more human interface centric?
Yeah. So this one, I probably would not be able to come up with a lot of specifics. But I do appreciate philosophy of Sahil Bloom and Adam Grant, and also Mark Mason. Adam Grant, he's if I'm correct, he's a Harvard psychologist who wrote a lot about organizational behavior and what are the important traits for individuals to be successful within organizations. Couple things that he wrote about is how to be good within the organization without being an asshole. Like in a sense, I think the book is called Givers and Takers. How do you become giver enough but not taker enough? And he was analyzing what kind of people succeed in organization, and he concluded that most of it, you should be a primarily giver and be a taker, sometimes protecting your own identity. So there has to be a balance. But he talks about those ways of how the organization scale and grow. And Mark Manson has to do mostly with how do we view the world and what are the priorities of our own selves and how do they reflect between the relationships. He's one of the people who I learned from that a relationship is a two-way street. If you feel like you're doing all the work for the other relationship to work and the other person is not doing anything, you don't have a relationship. And it's really difficult to recognize, especially just sitting in one's own head and you're thinking like, let's take let's take a work relationship. I've been flexible on my timing. I moved the calendar around. I wrote all the summaries. I did all the schedules. Like I did all the work, and the person is still not able to work with me. Like, what else can I do? And my immediate question to them is like, what have they done to move your relationship forward? And a lot of foundations there are coming to me from Mark Manson, like whose books and blogs I've read. So they're doing a pretty good job analyzing those human interfaces and how interact in those.
And for those who don't know, walk people through what Sahil's philosophy is.
So one of the more the recent Sahil's philosophy that I really appreciate is that action generates data. And let's say if you're really stuck in a place where you're going, and this is outside of like his book of like 5 Kinds of Wealth, like this particular philosophy, which I like of his, is that we sometimes wait for the perfect something to come in. Or we want to design something perfectly before we release it to the world, or we design a perfect sentence so it's said in the perfect way. But we do it in a guessing way. Like in a sense, like we think that's what the world wants, that we think that's what the market will accept. But if we are doing it in the market that we've never been before, we're doing it in the city that we've never been before, we're doing it at the festa we've never been before, we are more likely to fail. But the more we actually go to those festivals, those cities, those markets, that information just basically starts being absorbed by us, and we start making better decisions, because in the end, it's not just that information that we can pick up from books, it's also our own context. It's our own brain, our own experience, our own skills. When you put yourself in that context, you start realizing, oh, I didn't realize that I'm so much better than these people at this particular thing because it's just not available here. So I can leverage this more when I'm building my product or service or my company, and this is how I plug in here. This is my adapter. So Hill's philosophy is that like, do more, and eventually your surface of luck grows, not because it's going to grow physically, but because of number of permutations of exposures that you are having with the market or other people.
Does that mean, I guess that it applies to everything, right? Do more sales calls, go to more in-person events. Does that also include like being in certain areas? So, I know you're in Ithaca, New York as an example, which is not, no offense to Ithaca, not necessarily a hotbed.
I will agree with you.
Like, are you missing out on something that's, Sahil's perspective on like doing more things where like you're not in the mix of the tech space? or does it not matter because you're in a different place in your career?
So I think that the question is very much open. Like, I'm still discovering what is enough for my current practice. So I think it's very much possible to achieve it being remotely, but it's definitely slower than otherwise. It would be in a more populated center or being much closer to the place which have a lot more tech founders.
So that leads to the question, like, how do you decide what the right trade-off is, right? So every founder is dealing with similar trade-offs on a regular basis, right? So I live in San Francisco, and yet I don't go to that many events. I could. Now, I meet a lot of people in person because everyone comes through SF, but like, I don't go to as many as I could because there's other things for me to spend my time. So once again, like, how do I make this decision on a like sort of daily basis of where to spend my time, getting better at public speaking or in-person meetings or building my product or spending it with my family or building better relationships with my friends? There are all these trade-offs every day. How do I decide?
For sure. If this was coaching, I would ask you a question like, why you're not getting better at Japanese? And I'll answer this question myself. Like, probably because it's not a priority. But probably because it's like, even though it's an option to do that, you're not doing it. So in the end, you have still a more limited number of things that you can prioritize. And you also have a limited number of resources.
We only have so much time in a day.
Exactly.
And so much.
Exactly. But the number one step is inventorizing. Like, what are those things that you can really do? Number two, what are real resources do you have? Is it money? Is it time? Is it space? And three, what are the outcomes that you actually want to achieve? Because if you haven't defined that you want to get better at Japanese, you're not going to spend time getting better at Japanese. If you haven't defined that you want to be better with your family, you're not going to get better at that. Just doing it for the sake of it, just because, is not purposeful or meaningful enough, and you're probably not going to be as committed to that either. So
is the suggestion then that every founder and probably every person should have clearly set goals for themselves?
Yes.
And sort of say, I want to achieve X. We're recording this at the beginning of the year. You know, should people be setting sort of intentions for 2026, right? Hopefully for smart founders, they've already done 2026 game plan. They kind of know where they want to go and what they want to achieve. And by setting those intentions, it helps you prioritize where you focus.
That is correct. That is correct. Because otherwise we are allowing other people's priorities to dictate what we do. And not like priorities especially explicitly stated. It's more like we'll look at the other people's as role models and we're thinking, we need to become them. That has nothing to do with you, that you just decided you want to become them. But is that your true outcome? Have you defined them as a full person? Do you want to be them? What are your specific things? Do you really need $10 billion? Or are you happy with 10 million? Like, what is the thing that you're trying to achieve? And what you're trying to also avoid is to be ending up on a hedonic treadmill where you're just doing the thing for the sake of doing it without an outcome, because then you don't know when to stop or you don't know when to pivot because you're just asking for more and more and more and more, and you're wasting your time, you're wasting your money, and you're not achieving what you really want to achieve.
What % of founders come into your practice working with you with a good idea of those goals in mind, or do they have to spend a bunch of time trying to figure that out?
So I'd say everybody has a goal, and this is like an interesting thing about coaching. People don't seek coaching unless they have a goal in mind. It doesn't mean that the goal has been correctly selected or has all the different roots of it. It's more like they started thinking about the goal and they're realizing, oh, I don't actually know how to think about this. And I think I want to do this, but how can I check with somebody else? Because if you haven't started thinking about it, you have a pre-programmed path, and all of us have different pre-programmed paths from our circumstances that we're just on. Like, we'll go get a job as a developer, as starting a business because my dad did that, or my mom did that, or because I saw a friend did it, and let me just get another business going. But once they start questioning the why and the what, but then they're looking for a conversation partner. Then they're looking for a sounding board. And that's the point where I meet them.
Okay, interesting. That's when you bring them on board. So I'm going to jump to a little bit to sort of talk about like marketing, product, reality checks, all of that sort of stuff. But kind of the first question I want to ask, which is sort of related to like psychology as well. A lot of founders have this saying, right? Or it's not saying, but it's sort of like the market just doesn't get it yet. They don't understand my product. They don't understand what I'm trying to do. How do you distinguish sort of being patient versus denial versus, patience versus denial? Like, do you wait for the market to pick up where you're going to? Or is it just denial that maybe your product isn't right for the market?
One word which is I'm not hearing you say in between, and I think I know you probably know that, but I want to plug in the word need back in there. Because if we're just putting the product onto the market and nobody's using it, there's a question of why, right? Like we're not like that means like not enough conversations have been had with the users to tell them why it's not good. Are they telling you that the product is fantastic? Are they actually using it, right? There's the different gradations can you have about that experience. By just having a product out there and making a binary decision whether you should wait a little bit longer or should you change the product, the key ingredient there is talking to your users. And if the users are not understanding it, well, what are they not understanding about it? What need do they think that you're not solving that they have? I'll give you an example of which I have an anecdote about. An MBA grad, a new recent MBA grad goes to a monk monastery. And he's seeing all these monks manually chiseling the mountain away. Like there's 100 of them chiseling the mountain, and it seems like they're doing some construction project. And his smart brain says like to his guide, why don't you automate this? Why don't you like use all these automatic tools and automatic shovels and drills and so on? And the guide says, well, that would be faster. Because their goal has nothing to do with automation. Their need has nothing to do with making it faster. Their need is to spend the time. And doing it manually is the most effective. I'm not saying that's the right answer. I'm saying that that's what you should be doing. But that market, that crowd has that need. So if you come in with automatic tools and you're going to say that's going to be better for who? Right? So when I'm hearing questions like that, should you wait, should not, I'm going to ask, what are the users saying? What is your market saying? You might have invented the best mousetrap out there, but do people want Ferraris if their Toyota Corollas are just fine?
So how do you know if you're in between those things? So, and I ask this a little bit as a personal question. So in my company, Chore, we do back office, we run operations for startups. Yep. I am overly probably in belief that like this is a key thing for every founder to do. Like it is a terrible use of time to try to go run HR, finance, compliance, equity all on your own. Nor should you go try to hire someone to go do this for you because you have no idea how to recruit, hire, train, or manage someone in this space. So why wouldn't you just outsource it and delegate it to experts? We have a good business. We don't have a great business. And I worry sometimes we come across founders who just don't get it. And I have this question that I think about, like the market doesn't get that this is the future. Like the same way that AWS, you used to build servers in your garage. And then AWS came along and now no one does. And you don't even think about it. You just say, okay, I signed up for AWS. I don't think about how it works. I just know it works. And they have an SLA and delivery. I think operations will be the same way. But how do we go to the next step? Like, what am I in denial that maybe our product isn't that valuable? Or is it something else? Like we try to listen to our customers, we interrogate all of our sales calls using AI, we review them. What are we missing? And just using ourselves as an example.
Yeah, that's a good example. So I don't know 100% what's happening because there's a lot of details there. I think a lot of new experiences for people, especially your future users, they have to experience the pain of the need that you're solving. Let's say if I'm an immigrant. So if I'm speaking to somebody who is not an immigrant, or they are trying to build a business for immigrants, they will be missing that crucial component of emotional component that comes with that experience. And unless they experience it themselves, it's harder for them to click with the audience. And in a similar way, it's harder for these founders who are looking at your product to click with it because they haven't experienced the pain of loss of their home country or something like that, or their friends, or like the pain of actually doing the operations themselves. Because every single founder, well, most of the founders, they believe they can do it themselves right and faster.
And they probably think that for everything they build. I mean, I find that for founders, they think that in every side of their business, they think I can do this better and faster than it.
Exactly. So we kind of come to the place where maybe it's the sale process that we could look at, because one of the analogies that I use with a lot of founders who are not delegating well is that I think you can do all of these things, but are you ready to climb 20 learning curves at the same time? How long is it going to take? How much are you willing to pay for removing half of those learning curves, and who would you pay to? But then comes the question of expertise, right? Because let's say if I want to hire wealth accountant in Taiwan, whatever like what position is, I wouldn't know what that means to be good at that, right? So in the sense, like if I'm hiring Adam's company, what do I compare that to, right? Like there is no like thing that I can compare with my experience, because one is I didn't go through doing it myself. I didn't go through the pains. So I actually don't know what the problem Adam is actually solving for me yet.
Does the buyer have to go through the pain before, like for any product, do you have to go through the pain before you realize that it's worth buying? I mean, I don't know. I can imagine the answer is yes to that, but like, is that you can only buy once you know the pain?
I think yes, or if you can do the transfer learning. So in the sense, if you can attribute a different pain, let's say we are fine trying different types of food because we know it's food. We can transfer learn that we've tried other different kinds of food before. If we're seeing a new one before, we know what the process is of trying it and the risk is low, right? So now we're talking about what is there a way to try this in the minuscular way to immediately get the value, right? So then for the users to register like, oh my God, I definitely need this. Give me more of that. This is the best kiwi fruit I've ever eaten. So it's either pain, it's either transfer learning, or it's referral from a trusted person. Because otherwise, it seems incredibly risky. Like, why are you even doing this unless you truly believe that you're the smartest person in the world and you're seeing what they're doing?
Yeah.
Because I don't think anybody's convinced in the end logically. I think people are convinced emotionally, and either emotionally certainty or safety.
Okay. Is there a good way to get good at transfer learning? Like, how do you as a marketer, how do you create transfer learning for your buyer?
Analogies.
Okay.
Because we all exist in our own world. And like I brought up a few analogies before, like the surfing analogy, like the telling story, like the monk analogy. Because as I believe the smartest lawyer and the smartest doctor are not going to be able to talk to each other professionally because they're so distant from semantic perspectives. But if they're going to reduce themselves to the level of simple analogies, they will be able to communicate. And I think any new product that is being communicated to the world has to be adapted to the world of analogies to the people who are looking at this. So not the market as the burden of learning the new ways of talking about things, but you kind of saying it's like the chocolate for Ferrari or something like that.
That's why that's why I like to use the analogy of AWS. Same sort of idea, sort of in my mind. I don't know if it's working or we're just trying that out, but like that's the idea of essentially like, because I have founders who tell me, they say, hey, look, I don't understand this pain fully. It doesn't seem to make sense to me. And I'm like, well, do you build your own servers? No. I'm like, well, your servers are utterly critical to your business. And yet you just blindly trust AWS to go run this utterly critical piece. And yet you feel like you need to know the details of whether payroll system A or payroll system B is better. And then sometimes I get it more.
I think it's good analogy, but I don't think it's refers to the actual pain that they might experience. Like this scary story or things that from their past lives, like let's say waiting in a doctor's office, or waiting in a government office, or let's say if you're doing operations in the back office, I'm going to assume you're going to do some health benefits. You can maybe introduce the element of like, it takes about 1,000 hours for somebody to choose the right health plan. Do you really want to go through that? Like, what is the metric that they find the most painful? Is it the hours wasted? Is it, making a wrong call on you? Maybe there needs to be a guarantee of coming back. But in the end, it's about risk and safety and the smallest amount of time or money investment that they can make to try out something and say, oh my God, that's a lot of value.
Yeah, that's great. So I want to keep going, not make this about chore. So I know you talk a lot about market reality beating technical elegance.
Yes.
Why did technically brilliant founders struggle to internalize this meaning? And what does it even mean, market reality versus technical elegance?
Yeah. So I think technical elegance exists in textbooks. Technical elegance exists in very structured environments where things are relatable to each other. It's easy to explain. Another way, I also say that a lot of technical realities are built on first principles. In business world, first principles kind of go out of the window. Business world and the world of humans and the world of markets is built on trends. It's like an ocean. So going back to the whole surfer board analogy, wave comes up, waves comes down, up, down, AWS up, Microsoft down. We're using Delphi. Now we're using C#. Now we're using Python. All of that in each of those solutions was technically on the first principle pretty good. I mean, obviously there's difference in details, but overall it was very workable. Lots of $1 million businesses were built on those technical solutions, but they're all gone because it has nothing to do with market realities. those are just built on trends. And maybe it's not even just built on trends. It's trends. And it's trends of how our minds work and whichever way we're gonna go. And it all depends on sometimes it depends on the weather, sometimes it depends on opinions, and sometimes it depends on market fluctuations. But we have almost no control over it as entrepreneurs. We do have control over technical savviness and how we can apply those technical skills, but it's harder to do it in the market. And also goes back to like you asking like, why do engineers like that? Engineers have no experience doing that, because the only thing that they've been given at school in their own lives is like very world limited problems, because they look at the world through the lens of a problem set. And one of the number one complaints by engineers in startups or other technical organizations, why is the technical statement or the problem statement is not written well? What's wrong with you, product people? What's wrong with you, market people? What's wrong with you, CEO? Why can't you write the problem statement so it's so well so I can design the perfect solution? So they end up blaming the people who write it versus trying to understand that actually, no, that's a reflection of the market philosophy in the moment. This is a guess. This is a bet. And this is also a problem on the other side, because product people and because CEOs and because managers do not understand engineers' mindset of that, they do not tell them that it's a bet. They do not tell them that's a guess, because their own honor and their own ego is on the line, because they're guessing the vision of the market correctly. No, it's just a bet. It's a chance. And we're trying to see whether it's going to work or not. And the whole organization suffers because, you have these two egos, one which is always right and the other which wants to be right, but it's bound to the relationship, to the realities of the market.
What are early indicators that founders are building for themselves then versus the market?
Number one is number of users on the platform. Now, there's always a chance. And there's always a chance if you build something that is in your head, a bunch of other people will like it too and pay for it, and you might end up having a really great business.
And just to try to ask, like, don't you think there's a lot of advice that says like build for one true fan, right? Kevin Kelly, I think, talked about that. Like, build for one true fan, build for yourself, like build a product that you really want to see in the world, because if you want it, there's likely other people who also want it. So where does that go wrong for founders?
So I think that philosophy will work if you're right. That philosophy, unfortunately, does not have that knob of control of how many more people you want to like it or how many people less you want to like it. So you just...
Well, sure. I mean, you got to start somewhere, right? It's okay to start with a few people who want it and then keep iterating and building. And maybe at some point you still cap out because the market isn't big enough.
Absolutely.
But so how do you keep that going? Like, how do you go from that one true fan build for yourself to a better reality where you actually have a large number of customers using it?
So if you're talking about a fan, if they're using it, they're solving, again, going back, a specific need that they have. Now, because they started using it without identifying the need, that could be a little bit abstracted, in the sense like you might not be able to actually see what they're solving for themselves by using this tool. And you actually have to go back and have the customer discovery with that person who's using it, what they're using it for, because sometimes they may be using it for something else. Somebody may be using their cell phone to punch nails into the wall, and it's still very effective, and you keep building the most sophisticated cell phone, but that's not what the user is using it for. So if you have that set of fans, going back and having that discovery is very important. Yeah, I think that's what I'd...
Okay. So sort of the discovery piece.
Exactly.
How do you coach founders from separating the signal from the noise when it comes to building out these products and not default to confirmation bias?
Absolutely. I don't think I'll be able to tie this down to the electrical engineering definition of signal and noise. But no, the signal separates itself from the noise when you have enough data, when you have enough experience within the data set, within the market and environment, where you start understanding which things are which. And also trying to understand, if you only have like 2 or 3 data points, that's probably not enough to kind of make a conclusion. And the only conclusion you can make is like, let's get more data. And kind of going back to the Suhail Bloom statement, like action generates data. Like, what other activities do we need to do to generate data to support our hypothesis more? So in a sense, the more data points you have, the more of them you'll be able to classify as noise and signal, and you can going to be able to group them together and then follow the signal versus the noise. But if you only have 2 or 3 pieces of information, all of them could be noise or all of them could be signal, but you don't have enough context because you haven't learned about the market, industry, environment, or you haven't had spend enough time in that setting.
So just keep going deeper, basically, in that area.
Deeper, wider, whichever way will generate new and interesting data, which is relevant to your context.
So let's jump into like teams a little bit, in what that looks like, right? So in misalignment, teams, friction, those sorts of key things. Misalignment within a team rarely sort of announces itself kind of clearly. But what are signals or quiet signals that a leadership team is drifting apart and not working effectively anymore?
Yeah. So as a coach, external, I will observe that the people are not on the same page. I had a privilege of coaching a team once of 3 different founders, and I asked them the same question, but I asked them to answer that separately. And all 3 of them had different understanding of what their strategy was for the next year.
Mm-hmm.
That would be one indication. Number 2 is asking them, what are their expectations of each other? So if the CEO doesn't know what they expected of CTO and CTO doesn't know vice versa what a CTO is expecting, then how do you relate to each other and what do you prioritize other than your own intuition and your own gut, which also sometimes could be correct. But how do you kind of move forward if as a company you have an average head and average legs? Like how do they even coordinate between each other if you don't know the relationships between that? And then cultural involvement of the team. Like what's like we have some cultural attributes, like let's say Slack. Do you have a random channel with dogs and puppies or whatever? Like, how is the culture expressed in your company? Or you guys who just work, and you don't actually get a lens or perspective into how everybody else in the company is feeling.
And once you realize that that kind of misalignment starting to happen, is it possible to save it and fix it? I mean, like, what do you do then to try to fix it and make it better? Yeah, what do you do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously it depends on the stage. Like if people already resorted themselves to the fist fights, it's a little bit too late. But going back to, let's say, fixing the founder relationship is having those one-on-ones on a regular basis between each other, saying, are you cool with me? Are you cool with me? But maybe not in a close-ended questions, but like, what else can I do to add value to whatever you're doing, or what's on your horizon that is interesting or panicking you or worrying you, that I can add that. And you can ask it vice versa, because then you generate data and then you can all come together as 3 founders, say, this is the information that's been shared between all of us. And this is what we think is missing in our conversations. Also, here, what we recognize, we're ignorant of things entirely. Let's bring another person in to cover that gap. That's with, let's say, the founders team. And with the rest of the team, let's define what our cultural attributes are. And culture is usually not top down, it's bottom up. Some of it is top down, but a lot of it is bottom up. Like the culture is your people. What do they like to do? Where do they go? How can you express that? How do you can enable more voices to be represented in your company, in your team? How can you start speaking their language so they feel more belonging within the organization than making them only be appreciated if they follow your true way? Which is not necessarily always true for everybody.
How do you make sure then that the cultural values reflect the right sort of things in the company and that are being acted on a regular basis, right? Like your companies say lots of cultural things, but they don't necessarily follow them.
Yep.
How do you make sure they are being followed, or does it matter?
Absolutely. I think in the companies that they're not being followed, 2 things might have happened. One, the values were generated by management consultants by just talking maybe to the chief executives, and the companies are probably too large, 100,000, 200,000 to actually cohesively express the values of individuals. But let's say if we're talking about startups of under 50, individual conversations can take you far along. Just asking people, what do they value? What's important to them? Is it growing? Is it technical savviness? Is it becoming a manager? And that becomes kind of the 2.0 version of the whole company of where you want to go. And as part of those conversations, as part of those stories that people will share with you or the person who will be asking those questions, you can define the picture of who you are. And once you define those attributes, then you can come to the place of practices. We have those attributes, we have those values. How do we actually express them on a regular basis? How do we believe them? And they don't have to have the words, which is I sometimes find very abstract, like we create value for the clients. That is absolutely not actionable anything whatsoever. I don't know how to create value for the client. Like, I will listen to the clients more than I will talk. excellent mission, excellent, if you within, let's say, customer success or generally anywhere in an organization, that's a good thing. We just go back to that. Or we have a vision before we do anything practically. Sure. And that's a kind of guideline that you can create for your company. And as long as everybody's on the same page, maybe with executives making initial decisions and maybe choosing some of those items, you can define that culture and bring it back to where we're conscious, where we're breathing as one organism versus just individuals.
So I mean, speaking of that a little bit, right? Like in how founders in companies make decisions, like what differentiates founders who make clean decisions from those who kind of defer a lot or push off the tough decisions? How do you get good at making the tough decisions and making those quickly?
So I think one of the things with founders is that there's a lot of ego involved about being right, about making the right decision, or there's also the perfection bias where you're trying to make a decision with all the details available. But as soon as you recognize that none of us are perfect and whatever decision we're going to make is going to be incomplete, it removes that stress, removes that pressure from not making that decision. And as long as it is close to the whole company, listen, we're a small company. This is still an experiment. A lot of our decisions are going to be experimental, but we promise that we're going to bring it back to the baseline after we make a wrong decision. So this way, nobody in the company or even externally, if you can communicate it properly, will be judging you for making those wrong decisions because they will perceive it like, this is the experiment that we're running. This is the outcomes that we expect. We'll run it for a couple of months. We'll see what happens. And thus, it removes the pressure from the founders to actually not, removes pressure from making the decisions. And it becomes easier because one, you will find out what you'll find out in a very short period of time, and you have a mitigating route to come back to where you were starting from.
Okay. That makes sense. Is there a world where, like, I mean, I assume there's a high cost to postponing decisions, right? And to not making choices. So do you advise folks to move faster and as long as things aren't sort of, as Jeff Bezos was like, not a one-way door, make decisions, make them quickly and then move on?
I think there's always two decisions that you're making when you're trying to make decisions is like, do you have enough data to make the decision? We had multiple questions. Are you able to generate more data? Do you have time to make that decision? And I think all those three combined will help you decide whether or not you need to postpone that decision, which is also a decision. Or you make the decision on the spot.
A lot of decisions build up on each other. Related to another decision, like when should founders be thinking about delegating or outsourcing or any of that? How do they make those choices, and when are the right times to make those decisions?
Yeah, that's a good one. I like to use a framework of where if you are doing yourself something well already and it's recurring and it's schedulable, definitely has to go to somebody else. Number two, if it's a steep learning curve, it's easier to hire a consultant or hire an expert, or maybe two or three, and decide between them so they do that instead of you learning it. And three, just if you have more work on your plate than you have time and you by default must delegate, then it's also a proper time to delegate that. But the first two techniques are easier.
But I mean, so many founders have so much trouble admitting that they have too many things on their plate. I mean, I will never forget a conversation I had with a founder who basically told me that this is actually a funny one. His team reached out to me because they wanted the founder to use Chore. They wanted Chore for their company because the founder was running all the operations and he was messing everything up and missing deadlines because he didn't have effort. We're on a call and he says, I don't need you guys. I'm a founder. I can work 100 hours a week, no problem. Get everything done, run operations, and do everything else I need to do. The funny thing is that I was actually interested in their product too. So I almost on the call kind of became a potential customer. He said, I'll follow up with more information to get things going. It took him 3 weeks to follow up to potentially close a sale with me. And I'm like, so wait, but he didn't get that he couldn't work 100 hours a week and get it all done. And yet I'm sure his company has failed at this point because he was too stubborn to admit that he had too many things on his plate. His team recognized it, but he did not. And he couldn't even follow up on sales leads, let alone find time to admit that he should delegate.
So this is where good coaching questions can lead to introspection. Having others admitting to their own faults is almost an impossible task. A good question would be asked like, hey, all right, cool. And I'm not saying you didn't ask that. I just don't have the context, but I'm assuming, let's say, oh, cool. Like last time I spoke was 3 weeks ago. Is there anything could have been done to speak earlier? Right. Or let's say when they told you that they will be able to do everything themselves, so they work 100 hours and you say, okay, you work 100 hours for the current capacity. Do you know at which point you might start breaking? Like, let's say you have 50 people now, maybe it started breaking at 100 people, 150. Like, you cannot work 200 hours a week, right? Right. So, at which point do you think your system is going to start breaking? Not accusing him of anything, but having them walk that plank and tell you when that breaks up. No, I don't know if he's going to be right or wrong, but it's going to start the thought process in his head that like, oh, okay, so even though I am working really hard and I'm doing all these things, it's not scalable.
And yeah, it's making sure you, once again, going back to your sort of your key point, right? Asking all the right questions as much as you can. How often do you find in your coaching work, like founders resist the more pragmatic advice that you have, right? Like, and what does resistance in a sense tell you about their, leadership maturity?
I think I never offer pragmatic advice.
Okay.
Because it's never received.
They mean because they need to get to that state themselves, not hear you.
Correct. So, but also I can share my experience. In a sense, I accept that their context is never mine, but it is welcomed when I offer in my context, with my company, with my people, this what has worked. Now, there's no way 100% is going to work in your way, but see what I'm telling you and borrow any of the elements which might work for you. Now, this is not a saying like, you got to do it this way. This is the best way to do it, because that causes the most resistance, because it comes without knowledge of their context. But if I'm inviting them into my world, into my experience, and letting them pick the things that work for me, sometimes they hit that share and they go on. Or another way, if I feel like I know the right answer, I will ask them through the questions so they can arrive to that answer themselves. Because we as humans are much more certain of the answer if our own logical chains come into that. Because also otherwise, if the advice that you give is kind of wrong and it doesn't work, they blame you for giving that advice because it's disconnected from any logical chain that they've put together, and they cannot mitigate that because they don't have that experience.
And of course, there's no way they're going to have some of these experiences without actually just having, you can't, unless you use transfer, so you can't really help force them to have the experience. So what separates founders who grow rapidly through coaching from those who sort of plateau and can't get further along with it?
Practice. So if one word I have to kind of say there, going back to Sahil Bloom, it's like action and practice. The more things you practice, the more you fail, the more experiment, the more data you generate back, the more feedback you generate of how to now do it better in a way that is aligned with your outcomes. And if you don't practice, and if you postpone making changes or making experiments or running those experiments, nothing will change. And you'll be still as blocked.
A lot of people, though, want to stay stuck. In a weird way, I find a lot of people want to stay stuck because they don't want their priors challenged. And that's tough for them. I'm sure I'm the same way to some extent. I like to think I'm better than that, but generally speaking, I think we all have that. And is it just, once again, like you have to come into coaching or maybe life in general with that mindset of being willing and open to change and to constantly testing your hypotheses?
Yes. And also, let's say if we even ask the most stubborn person, like, what parts of yourself will you change and how would that look like? And you make them think for that. Wow, I'm not saying I talk to people who are in cults, but this is similar to another question that you talk to people, and given our current political situation, sometimes we're stuck in our own way. Is there anything I can share with you, or what type of information can I share with you to change your mind? And that makes their brain work for your conversation. I'm not saying work in your favor, but at least you'll hear how they're thinking about how they have their own structures, what needs to be true for them to change their mind. And if they're going to say nothing will change my mind, there is no point to continue the conversation. Like you have the exit point strategy right there.
That's actually a great, I think, sales question in some cases. If you think your product's great and it's a good fit for them, ask them what would change your mind if they're pushing back. Do you think leadership is becoming more difficult in a world of kind of rapid automation and AI, like kind of going back to where we started?
Probably, because a lot of times leaders' responsibility is to create that vision. But given the world's changing so frequently, we don't know what's going to happen. And so that for instability for people who crave certainty and confidence from leaders kind of deteriorates and makes them more anxious. and more anxious people produce less perfect products. But so I'd say it's more and yes, but I think we're all kind of being hierarchies are being extremely squished, like flattened, like in a sense that even those who are in the very behind end up being in the front lines kind of themselves. So we're all seeing the same thing happening together. So there's not a lot of judgment being passed to the leaders.
How do you think founders should rethink authority or trust in increasingly autonomous distributed teams? Like I think more and more teams are becoming more autonomous, more distributed. How do you rethink authority and trust in these situations, or should you?
Well, the trust part, I think if you're doing the videos, I think one of these days techniques are you got to wave the hand, make sure that you're not a robot, or you got to tilt your head left or right to verify that you're no longer AI. I think we're still not there to kind of figure out what is the right way to approach this. I think it kind of goes back to the action and motion and generating data. We haven't yet as a society generated enough data to conclude what will make the most trustworthy experience. I think we're still out there trying to figure out what is a trustworthy experience is online. Like we still cannot trust the random pieces of bytes and bits on the other side, no matter how well it's being put through the blockchain. Unless there is a physical person in front of you, it's really difficult to do that. But we're all learning and we're all generating data.
Every single day, every single moment. Is there something you believed early in your founder journey that you no longer believe at all?
I definitely do not believe that you need to work thousands of hours per week in order to get something done. And working smarter is better than working harder. That's a big mistake that I made, and I know that others are making. But it's also it's helpful to generate data, so there's a benefit to that. But you don't need to work as hard to get to where you want to go. And number two, ideas are less important than people. Because if you can have a relationship with the person, they'll buy anything from you, whether it be the water, whether it be a rocket, whether it be a government, whatever that is, as long as you have a good relationship, has nothing to do with the idea. So and that helped me understand the world better. So when you get out of your own head, once you start thinking about yourself as a perfectly the smartest person, that helps generate business and ideas and relationships, which again make you a much better entrepreneur.
Yeah, maybe that relates to this sort of other question, which is if you could install one operating belief into every technical founder's mind, or maybe every founder's mind, what would that be?
Ask open-ended questions and listen more.
That's great. So kind of on that note, one of the questions I like to ask at the very end of the podcast is there a single piece of advice that you would give to every single founder to become more entrepreneurially excellent? What would you boil that down to? Is there's one piece of advice that everyone can take away from this? What would it be?
Yeah. So I'll go back to a little bit to what I said, but add more to that. So engineering world and scientific world, and this is addressing to a lot of technical founders, is built on the world of first principles. The world of business is built on trends, and the way you get successful in that is not by just learning more and thinking you're smart, and thinking that you're stupid. Why couldn't you come up with that? But the world of business is, to be successful at it, you have to have a list of hacks, list of tricks, list of things that you learn through experience that there are other people, and that's how you get successful. And it's not the same thing with engineering. So if you ever get frustrated that like, oh, I'm so smart, why am I not good at business? It's just because you're not collected the right mushrooms yet in the forest, because you haven't been to the forest and you haven't collected those mushrooms, those tricks, those hacks in order for you to be a great business person. So the takeaway is go out, generate data, be active, be in motion, so you can collect those proverbial mushrooms, proverbial tricks and hacks, so your business could be better.
Great. That's great piece of advice, especially for technical founders. And sort of maybe a question there, because it just popped in my head right now, is do you think it's, given the world is changing, like, so I have a thesis that being a technical founder is less and less valuable because of AI, because you can essentially vibe code anything. And in fact, some of the best quote unquote coders I know today are people who have no engineering background at all. What their actual skill set is being great at asking questions and listening to feedback. And they actually, with the help of AI, can code even faster. So in other words, being an engineer almost matters less. Now, so what actually becomes more important is being that great business leader in learning the way you just described. Is that sort of the future that everyone needs to get good at?
So I think we can have another podcast. So of how do you define an engineer? And the end, engineering it provides a really great mindset for problem solving. Is that sometimes we just get too attached to the context of specific bytes and bits and types of problems that we've solved in the past. And when we transfer learn it to start solving human problems, I think it's very effective. So I think if you maintain the engineering problem mindset, then it's always going to be important. Well, always. I don't know. Next 50 years will show us what's important. But for now, I think maintaining the mindset will be very helpful, whether or not you're actually coding directly or not.
Fair enough. Vladimir, how can people get in touch with you, find you, learn more about what you're doing? Where can folks get in touch?
Great question. So Adam, I have a website, humaninterfaces.co, and I'm offering discovery sessions there if you would like to explore some of the concepts mentioned of this podcast, which you can click at the top of the page.
Excellent. Vladimir, thank you so much for being on this call. Your time is precious. Thank you for spending some of it with me and my audience. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Adam. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.